One of the ladies here handed me a clipping from the paper that I would like to read to you because I think this clipping is very interesting, and I think it will also be quite entertaining. It's by Arthur Hoppe, and it's called Sound the Eviction Notice. So here we go. Scene: the Heavenly Real Estate Office. The landlord, thoughtfully stroking his long white beard, is listening to the annual year-end report from his collection agent, Mr. Gabriel. Gabriel: and the exploding novae in Sector 4782 now seem under control. But that runaway galaxy in the 584th quadrant still requires your attention, sir. The landlord wearily: it isn't easy keeping a billion trillion stars in their courses. Is that all, Gabriel? Gabriel: no, sir. I still have the special report on that tiny planet you love so. The landlord, pleased: ah, yes, Earth, my little blue-green jewel. Frowning: are the tenants still gouging up my mountain meadows, burning holes in my forested carpets, and befouling my blue seas and crystalline air? Gabriel: yes, sir, and they're still brawling, fighting, and killing each other off. Hopefully raising his trumpet: shall I sound the eviction notice now, sir? The landlord: wait, Gabriel, there's one thing I don't understand. Don't they know they are all children of God? Gabriel: yes, sir, they all know that. The landlord: then how can a child of God bring himself to maim or kill another child of God? Gabriel: oh, he doesn't, sir. First he performs a magic rite, changing his enemy into something less than human. Then, when his enemy is no longer a child of God, he maims or kills him in good conscience. The landlord: what an awesome power. How do they manage this incredibly complex transformation? Gabriel: very simply. Look down there, sir. Can you see through that blanket of smog? Now take those two fine men in blue. The landlord: ah, yes, two stalwart officers of the law, sworn to protect their fellow man. But who are those crowding around them? Gabriel: young idealists, sir, dedicated to social justice. Now listen, hear what they're shouting: pigs, pigs, pigs. The landlord, aghast: and they're throwing bricks at those two policemen, trying to maim those two children of God. Gabriel: oh, no, sir, not children of God, pigs. The demonstrators have transformed them into pigs and can now maim them in good conscience. The landlord: I see. And that big soldier over there in Vietnam shooting at a fleeing old woman, has he changed her into a pig too? Gabriel: no, sir. He changed her into a gook, a dink or a slope. It was easy. She didn't speak his language, nor was familiar with his customs. That always makes the magic easier. The landlord, sadly: transforming the children of God into pigs and gooks? How tragic. Gabriel: oh, not only pigs and gooks, sir, but nips and wops and krauts and chinks. For example, they never lynch a fellow man until they've turned him into a nigger or a coon. The landlord, shaking his head: it's blasphemous. Gabriel, gleefully raising his trumpet: shall I blow, sir, and wipe those scum from the face of your earth? The landlord, his brow darkening: these what, Gabriel? Gabriel, ranting: those rats, that trash, these suddenly lowering his trumpet, crestfallen: oh, forgive me, sir, I'm no better than they. The landlord, in a voice of thunder: never forget, Gabriel, that he who would transform a child of God into something less than human is an accessory to murder. That's the end of it. I thought it was very clever. The paper? You want copies of it, huh? I see. I'm sorry, it's just San Francisco, Arthur Hoppe. Probably the Chronicle. Seattle Post-Intelligencer. Certainly is intelligent. Well, as they say in the Army, we're here because we're here because we're here. But that's not why we're here. As far as the human race is concerned, we have a much greater purpose. And somehow I think, as I recall my own boyhood, when they had a great motion picture called The Birth of a Nation, that the early pioneer days of this country speak of a devotion that is now maimed and lost, but not ultimately or completely dead. We can still count on many, many people who are proud of their heritage, who are proud of what this nation means, this nation America. Somehow or other, I find it very difficult in these times to ignore the idea of the meaning of the American way of life. And so I want to speak on America, Christ Loves You, and World, Christ Loves You, because Christ is not addicted only to America, but to the whole world. But America is a special dream of God because of its great melting pot facilities, the facilities to take in the people of all nations and make of them a great and mighty people, an independent nation dedicated to the principles of freedom. Somehow or other, in this day and age, now that we have lost our concept of religion as a nation, now that we are listening to Madeleine Murray O'Hare, whatever it is, it's kind of a snarl anyway. Now that we are listening to her and to the voices of dissent in this country that seem determined to try to destroy us, I think we should turn then to the idea of Christ as the lover of this country and Saint Germain, the great being of freedom, as one who helped to found this country and therefore is still interested in maintaining this country as a free and independent nation. I don't know how many of you have actually gone through Disneyland and heard Mr. Lincoln speak down there, but I assume that many of you have. If so, you will recall that he said that if this country was ever destroyed, it would not come from without, but it would come from within. But I think, of course, semantics are always a problem, and it's sometimes difficult to exactly say what we mean. Mr. Lincoln indicated that it would come from within, from Americans. But to say that it would not come from without is wrong in this case, because the foreign ideologists that have come in here with their Marxist and communistic philosophies bent on the destruction of this nation have determined that they are going to subvert us by literally drowning the kid in his mother's milk, if you understand me. In other words, our sons and daughters, those that we have given birth to, that we have housed and fed and loved, have become now the enemy of the so-called older generation, yet in a matter of 10 or 20 years they will be the older generation. For the torch that is passed to them, that we have passed to them, although sometimes imperfectly held, certainly is a better vision than the one which they are now currently seeing. So, in the midst of all this confusion, it is difficult for us to think in terms of the love of Christ for this nation. I'm sure that many people have an idea of Christ as an austere being, that they think of him either as a beautiful man with long hair and mild eyes, who is not too interested in the problems of this age, or they think of him as a ranting and raving fanatic who is castigating everybody for their iniquities, threatening them, and one whom they should actually fear. This is a ridiculous picture that I am sure was never painted by God or any of the true disciples of the Christ, because the Christ definitely loves America. And the reason that the Christ loves America is because of what America can mean to the world in all of its madness. Oh, I know that with our present flaws, we may present a vision of the ugly American to the world at large. People looking at us from their vantage point, through their own eyes, may see us as a greedy, grasping people, bent on pleasure, who are wise in our own conceits, and that we are not very much interested in helping them. Now, it's very difficult for me, quite frankly, having lived through the Roosevelt era, to see how anyone could ever think that this nation, with all of its giveaways, has not had concern for the world. I think our nemesis is actually the tremendous concern and response that we have given to the world. The more we have done for people abroad, it seems the less they love us. And I do not think, of course, this would have come about if it were not for the distortions and lies that have been taught to them, that have been told to them through their own newspapers and through their own communist fellow travelers. I think that the fellow travelers have painted a very bleak picture of America and have made them feel that all of the haves, because we do have a lot, you know, here. We have a lot. And I think that because we have, those who have not are often prone to want to take from us what we have and say, oh, you're not entitled to it. My concept, or the concept that I have, is the concept that I feel is the correct Christ concept of the abundant life. Because Christ loves America, I think he wants to see the people of this land well-fed, well-housed, well-educated, and afforded every opportunity to develop their cosmic instincts and make spiritual progress. I believe this is true. I do not think, and I want to state it again, that Christ is not interested in the rest of the world. This is preposterous. Christ is interested in the whole world, in the Eskimos in Alaska, and in the people down at the tip of Cape Horn. All over the world, the Christ stands, not just alone as the Christ of the Andes or the Christ of America or of Europe or the Christ of the Swiss Alps, but the Christ of everywhere, even the Christ of Russia. To me, the American dream was a divine plan, and still is, to export to the world not just commodities such as grain and the things that we make, the products of our factories and forests and fields, but to export to the world the dream itself so that others can kindle the dream in their own lands. Now, I feel that Christ is a very important part, in fact, the central part of this dream. Without the Christ, The dream to me is so fragile that I suspect it will break at any moment and become totally unreal. Our life that consists now of pieces of frosted glass with streams of electrons bombarding it, that consists of questionably put together pieces of steel and glass with motors in it and blazing lights dashing at breakneck speeds down the highways, of tremendously powerful aircraft that soar through the airs and roar off the runways with a voice of thunder, with the capacities to build skyscrapers towering into the air and fill them with people who move in swiftly dropping and rising elevators. I do not believe that all of these or any of these consist of the realities of America. These are simply scientific achievements intended to make our life more pleasant. They represent the developing mind with its capacities to cope with the vital forces of nature, our natural resources. These resources themselves are God-given, but we are using them and neglecting the internal resources in man that will enable him to hold a vision of appreciation of the divine intent to create a spiritual brotherhood that has its origin in the individual monad. The individual monad is still the most important commodity of all, because we ourselves are imports from heaven to this planet. We should understand this. I perhaps should say exports. It doesn't make any difference. At least we were apported or brought here some way or other. And now that we're here on this little planet, in the middle of this universe, in the middle of this galaxy, somewhere floating in space, we must master our environment or be swallowed up by it. I mentioned before the great dragon Tiamat, and I would like to point out that this Tiamat to me represents the chaos that will devour us unless we are able to preserve ourselves out of the chaos. As I see it, chaos is the threat of every man. It is the antipode of creativity and of living life as Christ intended it to be lived. He intended it to be lived in the fullness of mastery. But what have we done with it as a nation, as a world? We are concerned with, as the poets have said, ant concerns. Our minds are filled with this ruck and nonsense, and we do not actually hold our head upward and upright toward the stars and recognize the latent capacities inherent within ourselves that will enable us to cope with this environment that otherwise is merely a twisted and meaningless jumble of things that are warped in space and that are actually causing our minds to reel because we wonder just what is their function. Now, Christ is the great director of all of this, the Christ of the individual, and his love is a commodity that we need to draw to ourselves. It is not enough for Christ to love us. We must receive that love. We must actively concentrate upon that love. And so tonight, while I'm giving you this lecture, America, Christ loves you. World, Christ loves you. I want you to understand that you have the capacity individually to perform an exercise in consciousness. This means that you, as an individual, can start right now looking to the God flame in your heart and saying, yes, I have a minute portion of thee in myself, And as Khalil Gibran so beautifully put it in The Prophet, it is a flame spirit gathering more of itself. Our role then is to draw that flame from the heights of cosmic reality, or mine the wealth of the gods out of the heart of the earth in the depths of reality, everywhere reaching out into the universe, so filled with Christ's love, because all things were made by him, and without him was nothing made that was made. Drawing that energy then down into the force field of our individual selves, so that we may qualify it with receptivity. Unless there is receptivity, the omnipresent forces of the universe go unharnessed. Build a Netherlands on the North Sea, or be a Netherlands on the Atlantic without windmills. And the wind blows and spends its energy, and nothing is done. But put up a sail on a boat, large or small, build a windmill, and gear it so it will turn, and it will do an appointed task. We should recognize then that it is not enough to live in a universe of omnipresent power, omnipresent reality, omnipresent love. It is not enough to have a Christ standing here with arms outstretched, wanting, so dearly wanting to pour his love out to us, individually per se, and collectively to our nation and world. We ourselves, by our attitudes and a sense of greatness, must magnify the Lord. I think this is probably captured most beautifully in the Kyrie Eleison, the Christi Eleison, the idea of the Christ as a moving spirit upon the human spirit, with whom we can identify and say, as John the Baptist so ably said, "There cometh one after me, whose shoelaces I am not worthy to untie. He shall baptize you with the Holy Spirit and with fire." He also said, "He that cometh after me must increase, but I must decrease." I then set before you tonight in this lecture a cardinal principle whose virtue will serve you well. It is this statement of John's: "He must increase, but I must decrease," in the certain knowledge that without Christ our human personality would be an incoherent babbler. We must recognize the need to accept his power and his grace. And as his power and his grace increases in our lives, it robs us of nothing that is worthy of having, but it adds to us an immeasurable enrichment of the Spirit, worlds without end, that enable man, as Zarathustra of old, to ascend back to the very heart of God from whence he came. The love of Christ for America is a love that we must ratify by demanding that the Holy Spirit breathe its breath upon that coal of Christ reality now softly glowing in our heart, that can become a consuming flame, to take out the dross from our lives, to mend the flaws and errors in our nation, to reconstruct our world not only socially, but in all of its various facets and departments of life, until the full measure of the Christ is manifest in these departments of life. Then the healing unguents are being applied, and the healing power of God can flow. It is already here. It is within us. It remains for us to know it. And in the knowing of it, there is a calm certainty that fixes itself into our world as a hidden compass. And when this compass is suddenly concentrated upon by our mind through the sending of our love out from our heart to God, we feel as though we were like the young man in the painting many of you have seen, where he stands at the helm of a ship, his hands upon the wheel, but behind him is this Christ. It is almost as though the Christ were an overshadowing radiance, an overshadowing cloud of beauty that could reach his arms, both right and left, around the young man, and wherever error was introduced, would give direction. This we welcome. This we need, individually and as a nation. If we do, as England has primarily done, and this we have witnessed for ourselves, close the door upon Christianity, upon Christ's concepts, and allowed her churches to become almost as dead as Gray's elegy on a country churchyard. Then you see, if this is what happens to America as it has happened to England, we will go down as England has gone down, from one of the first-rate nations of the world, Britannia rules the waves, to a second, third, and fourth-rate power. Because in God we trust is actually the one full measure of reality that we can look to for all our hope of the future. We cannot look to leadership from the office of the presidency unless, as we long ago witnessed on the movie screen, we would be able to have in the White House a man such as was depicted in the play Gabriel over the White House. In this play, the President of the United States is fatally injured in an automobile accident but does not die. As he is in a state of transition, Gabriel, the archangel, comes down and stands over the body, and when he makes his exit out into the universe, Gabriel walks into his body and takes it over and becomes the President of the United States. I remember it well because the effect of this was portrayed through the blowing of the wind gently on the curtains of the White House, and as they went out, certain ethereal music would play, and you were made aware that a change had come over the President, played then by Walter Houston. Some of you, I am sure, remember him. He was a very able actor, a great dramatist, one that we have scarcely seen in our time. But at the same time, this beautiful drama showed that simply by a change of personality and direction, a public office could become a holy office. Today, at a time in our history when we need leadership more than any other time because of the present world crisis, heightened by the shortening of the arteries of communication and transportation, we find ourselves face to face with a dearth of statesmanship. I am not in any way saying that our president is not himself a great man. He may well be. I am simply saying that the age has not produced, in our opinion, men as great as we would like to see. I will say, however, and I do not mean this as a political effrontery to anyone, that I must pay tribute to the governor of this state, Ronald Reagan, for his tremendous stand to try to keep law and order here in California. I must also say that this man from the Hollywood stage, from the motion picture industry, has demonstrated that political capacity does not have to come entirely from the law, from jurisprudence, but can come from other arts and other fields. I think he has demonstrated admirable statesmanship. I read a lecture, a speech that he gave some time ago, in which he told the story of the presence of Saint Germain at the time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And I was quite thrilled to realize that Ronald Reagan actually knew this story. It was the story of the stranger who came to Independence Hall, who in a moment of hesitation, when the early founders of this country, having pledged their lives, their honor, and their fortunes to God and country, stood there in that moment of hesitation that often comes before momentous decisions, and said to themselves, shall we actually do this? Because, after all, if we don't hang together, we may all hang separately. And hang they would have if George III had had his way, or the redcoats could have turned the tide. But the power of the American Revolution was very much decided. And of course, in Independence Hall, when we stopped to consider the signing of the Declaration of Independence, this was a mighty and historic moment, which today will be lost to our lives if we permit the love of Christ and the love of God for the founding and cardinal principles of this country and its Constitution to go down the drain. The way of life in that era was fascinating. Without the great modern steamships that we have, or airplanes, without the automobile, radio, or television, living quite simply with horses and carriages, living with a family Bible and a few books, the early founders of this country found time to indulge themselves in the pleasantries of life, where they were able and willing to find in people and in human hearts the answers to the searching questions of existence and of consciousness. They enjoyed a different type of life than we do. The pace was slower. Their interests were different. They were limited in many ways compared to what we are, yet their spirit expanded and forged us a nation that expanded and spread from the east to the west. And mighty railroads were builded, and ranches were developed, and land was tilled, and homesteads were developed. Churches were put up, and the churches became the central focus of the various developing areas. Many people even then preferred their saloons. They preferred their bawdy houses. They preferred everything except the church. But the hard core of America, around which revolved the central family life that enabled this nation to develop, always made the church their central focus. And therefore, the love of Christ, whether it be in church or without, is the central power that started this nation. It's the central power that sustained this nation. And it is the central power to which we must return. I have long been aware now of a principle which I would convey to you, and it is the principle of one acting for another. It does not have the same effect that a personal ratification of an idea does, but it certainly is valid. I refer to the acceptance for anyone, including a nation, of a certain principle. In other words, what I'm telling you is that you here tonight can accept the love of Christ for this whole nation. And by your acceptance of it, it becomes a matter of karmic reckoning, and it strengthens the forces of light on this country. The dragon of darkness wants to strike terror to the hearts of the people through his spread and promulgation of chaos. If he can spread chaos into the hearts and minds of people, disorientate them, make them feel, and I'd like to use this word, discombobulated, disconnected from their presence, disconnected from reality, chaotic, and like a rudderless ship, he has then and there actually taken that master stroke that could well bring about the debacle of our destruction. Why then do I say to you tonight, ratify for humanity here in America the acceptance of all the cardinal principles of life that involve the love of Christ for this nation? Because your act in Congress assembled in Santa Barbara, if you can accept this then here and now and ratify it for this nation, to me, you are just as much a Congress of righteousness. In fact, I think more so than any other Congress anywhere. And this is not anarchy, because our first allegiance is to God, and our second allegiance is to our country. And I will say this with the full fire of my soul, that he who loves God and is an American loves his country best. Because love of God always produces the best gifts to one's country. If you love God, you do not want to defraud your countrymen. Of course, I fully recognize that we here are more than probably the early first colonists. And so when you look at the staggering millions in this country, it's a little bit difficult for us to have compassion and empathy for those that are so far removed from us, spatially speaking, or in their thoughts. We didn't have any hippies in the early days of the colonies. We didn't have Sears and Roebuck and Montgomery Ward and the Wall Street Stock Exchange. We bartered. We didn't even have wampum. The Indians did. There's a lot of things that we have now on which we have become frightfully dependent that did not exist then, that are now with us. So, knowing that we're approaching the end of my lecture, I want to stress to every one of you that this seemingly intangible yet magnificent Christ must be drawn forth in a greater measure. If I sell you a bushel of wheat for a penny, you know the meaning of a measure, the measure of a bushel. But if I say to you that by comparison, your understanding of Christ, what Christ means to you, is a bushel, then I'm saying to you, let's bring in 1,000,000 bushels in place of the one. In other words, let's draw more of Christ through ourselves. The cup won't hold him. True. It doesn't have to. There are people out here in America begging for Christ. They want him in all of their desires. He is the fullness and fulfillment of all their desires, but they know it not. Behold, the bridegroom cometh. As a nation, we have been deceived many times, and as religious people, we have been deceived many times. You know what has deceived us a great deal of the time is the idea of the second coming of Christ. Supposing that in the year 1492, Christ had come, where would we be today? Perfect nation now? If he came and took away with him those who were decent, if he skimmed the cream off the planet and left the skim milk here, and we were the inheritors of a skim milk destiny, would we really be better off than we are today? You see, every age has the opportunity for Christ fulfillment. In one sense of the word, every eye sees him. In one sense of the word, Christ is with us now, always has been, and always will be. I know that there are people who deal with eschatology and eschatological concepts. They want to think in terms of final ends. To me, taught by the masters, there is no final end. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. One version said, and I am also the middle. And so I like to think that this, without mother and without father, without beginning and without ending, this indomitable spirit that I am, is representative of Christ's magnificence once I divest it of all of the false and shoddy things that I have attached to it through the centuries. Therefore I see the great elder brother, the living Christ, and his inheritance, and I witness along with it my own, your own, our common destiny, joint heirs with Christ. And I see this reflected in America, where the cornerstone of the temple has long ago been laid. But the master masons of the destiny of America have seldom recognized their role in continuing to build a temple in which the living Christ could control determinately the destiny of a people by training up a child in the way in which he should go. Because somewhere along the line we have educated ourselves to the idea that when a man becomes 21, he is capable of thinking for himself and making right choices. The thing that we have overlooked here is that there is only one right choice. There are not millions of right choices. There is only one right choice for us all, and when that ultimate choice is made, the choice of Christ or Antichrist, when it is Christ for America, then you see the love of Christ in its great reciprocal action will naturally bring about the production of the kingdom of heaven here on earth and in the hearts of our people. But we dare not think, because a man is 21 or 31 or 61 or 91, that he is mature. As I said this afternoon, our maturity comes at any time. This depends when we are ready to wake up. But we make that mistake. We endow our people with the right to guide their own destiny. I do not propose that we should take this from them. I propose that we should begin the true education of the universe, the education to the Christ consciousness of our whole being, body, mind, and soul. Oh, you're not going to do it tonight, or tomorrow night, or next year, but if you will only do that increment that you can do tonight, if you will only exhibit the amazing capacity to do what you can right now and fulfill it. So, our destiny then lies not so much in the hands of God as in our own hands. In the hands of God, once we have taken the onus upon ourselves, the burden, the responsibility of putting ourselves in the hands of God. Do you see what I mean? We have to put ourselves there. And this is not an act that is done once and then forgotten. I remember once, when I was 15, I wrote in my family Bible, Tonight, on May the 5th, 1934, I was saved. We should write this in our Bible every night. We must take the steps that assure us of ultimate salvation, because this is following Christ. And if you and I do it, we are helping the destiny of America to come into being. If we don't do it, we are casting away the crown of opportunity that God has given us. And nowhere, no, not in the spilled blood of our youth, not in the energies we have given to light and righteousness, nowhere does anything have a meaning as great as the destiny of America, because the destiny of America is the destiny of the world. Why? Because only America has Uncle Sam. Do you know who Uncle Sam is? I know some of you do, and I'm going to close with that. You remember the little boy Samuel the prophet? Samuel the prophet heard God speaking to him and saying, "Samuel, Samuel." He didn't know what to do about it. And God spoke to him again and again. And finally, you remember, I think it was Hannah, told him, she said, "The next time this occurs, you say, 'Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth.'" And he became the great Samuel prophet. That was the name of my grandfather, too. And so, Samuel prophet, Samuel the prophet, had many other embodiments afterward. He was Joseph, the father of Jesus. He was Francis Bacon, the author of the Shakespearean plays. He was Christopher Columbus. He was the Baron of Verulam, Viscount St. Albans. He had many illustrious embodiments. And there is some rumor to the effect that he was Johann Kelpius, who dwelled as the hermit in Kelpius Cave in Fairmount Park in Philadelphia, and was instrumental in baptizing George Washington with an ampule of oil, and crowning him as the son of the Republic, endowed by God with the role of the uncrowned king to go out and found this nation and lead it to its ultimate victory militarily, and then in its first presidency to the people of this great land. That man, who also appeared in the hall and cried out, "Sign that document," and then disappeared, was Uncle Sam, Saint Germain, if you will, and therefore the greatest exponent of freedom the world has ever known. And all he wants to do, not only from his castle, the House of Rakoczy in Transylvania, but from all of the retreats in which he serves, is to spread the balm of freedom to the world that will be an echo in the hearts of the freedom fighters in Hungary, the freedom fighters in Czechoslovakia, the freedom lovers of Poland, the freedom lovers of Ireland, of England, of all of the lands beyond the sea, of India and of France. Every nation upon this earth and all people of all races and creeds can rejoice together in the service St. Germain through the centuries has rendered to this land. Yes, America, Christ loves you, St. Germain loves you. Yes, world, Christ loves you, St. Germain loves you. God bless you.